All right. So let's get down to the actual games the Nuggets have played. My overarching question for this segment is, have the Nuggets shown us something different in the Clippers and the Kings games? They win the Clippers game 120-98. That was a blowout win. And the Kings game 130-129. That had the potential to be a blowout, and then it wasn't.
Yeah.
Before we get into the actual details of the games, how did you feel about the last two games, just kind of overall, and what you saw from the team?
I mean, the Clippers win was definitely more reassuring just because we had been getting smoked by the Clippers all the time. And,
True.
that was a game where Jokic didn't have to do as much as he's usually been doing. I think in both games it
Yeah,
was a
I
little
thought
bit like
Jokic
that.
was. That's a good point. These were probably the two worst Jokic games of the year offensively.
Well, yes, in the Kings game he had 5 turnovers, so that was like his biggest point of
He was
uh
so like he was struggling to score on Sabonis though.
yeah,
Like it wasn't just the turnovers.
right. But I think that's like that was the biggest glaring thing for me.
Yeah. Okay, so in the Clippers game, I think that was a really great defensive game from the whole team, to be
Mhm.
completely honest. I saw there were a lot of people that were really annoyed because the starters got off to a really hot start, just defending really well, getting out and running, and just like scoring on them in transition. I mean, I'll just kind of like go over like my quick game summary. They were really good at the point of attack throughout the whole game. I think they had a good game plan against James Harden. It's tough with the POA that we have, but they were playing a lot of drop. And I thought Jamal in particular was actually really active fighting over screens, and that was good. And when it was Christian, he was getting bumped off of the screen, but he was doing a better job of chasing. He wasn't able to like recover back in front of the ball handler, but he was chasing and able to kind of bother the dribble. Like he and Jokic in concert, kind of working together to bother the dribble of like James Harden in particular, and either force turnovers or force them into like a tough contested floater instead of being able to get off like an easy lob. And it was the same coverage they used. And when I say they, not just the team, but I thought that Jokic and Christian in particular figured out a better kind of defensive chemistry in that coverage. And I saw it executed really well in the Jazz game. And yeah, it's like the Jazz, like they suck, right? So I was curious to see what it would look like against better ball
Mhm.
handlers, but I thought they executed well in that last game against the Jazz, where Jokic was playing a lot of drop, but he was very active in the drop. And even though it was a deep drop, so guy comes off of the screen, in this case, it's James Harden. Jokic is all the way in the paint, making sure that Zubac isn't available to get a lob on the roll. But once the guy comes into the paint, you've got Christian pressuring from behind and pressuring the dribble from behind in particular, and Jokic also able to, while not giving up the lob, able to disrupt the dribble enough to make them either the ball handler either pick it up and like pass it, like often contested passes, because the Clippers turned the ball over a hell of a lot in this game, almost as much as the Nuggets did. And we'll talk about the offense. But I thought it was just a really smart game plan. I almost feel like, honestly, in the first half, they expended so much mental energy on defense that they got CTE and like couldn't execute anything offensively because they were just throwing the ball all over the place. And it was everyone. It was Jokic, it was Jamal, it was Russ.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, like
In the
focus on
second
one
half,
thing.
yeah. And in the second half, the defense continued and they just stopped turning the ball over. And that was the difference
Yeah.
in the two halves of that game. And then it turned into a blowout.
James Harden had 9 turnovers. I thought that was probably the story of the game and why the
Yeah.
Clippers probably lost. And it was both units, and like you described with Christian and Jokic covering screens with James Harden. I mean, Russ and DeAndre Jordan were kind of doing the same, where Russ was staying attached and getting steals from behind on James Harden. And even with James Harden in
Yeah.
the post with Jamal Murray, Zubac is in the
I thought,
dunker, and
I know
then
the exact play you're thinking of. And Jokic came over and was able to kind of bother that pass too. Because I think Harden, it was interesting. Harden was kind of passive in this game. Like he was looking to make the pass, and he's like, "Oh, Jokic is coming over and help. I'm going to try to create the passing angle to Zubac." But it's different when Jokic is doing that than when Harden is doing that, just because he doesn't have the height
yeah.
to kind of get it over
Yep.
the contest, and so that turned into a turnover too.
Also, I think, guards, they always try to push it into the restricted area, whether you're this was like a post-up move, but if you're trying to drive in, you should go when the big's skating out of the paint when, the 3 seconds is
Yeah.
coming up. He went in right when Jokic was entering the paint. So it was good timing by Jokic and or bad timing by Harden. I don't know if he saw all that, but then, yeah, he couldn't get the pass off. So, yeah, it was just, I think even Jokic got his hand on a couple pocket passes potentially that went wild with James Harden. So,
Right, because he wasn't just playing drop. There were also times when he was playing like way up on the screens and reading the pocket pass as well. In particular, when it was like Norm Powell as a ball handler, but I think it was a couple of times with Harden too. Like they were just kind of mixing up the coverages a little bit, even though
yeah,
they played drop for the most part.
which is, I think, a big storyline for the Nuggets defense right now, and how they are, maybe they're not mixing up coverages as much, but at least willing to not just do the same one all the time, by playing up to touch with Jokic, and maybe being willing to try drop more. Ideally, you'd want to use the right coverage for certain situations, but it's very hard to do that in the regular season all the time. It's easier to do in playoff settings when you know the team that you're playing against and which players you want to do certain coverages with, because you're just going to get probably confused on certain situations where a player has the ball, and, on certain situations you're supposed to play up to touch, and on others you're supposed to play drop. It's easier to like miscommunicate or a player to forget which situation. It's just hard to be that consistent, especially with this many games. But before we get to like Kings, what'd you see with the Nuggets offense against the Clippers?
Oh my gosh. Well, the Nuggets turned the ball over 14 times in the first half of that game. So they actually went up pretty big in the first stint with the starters, and the stagger units with Jokic to close the first quarter actually extended that lead as well. It started a little bit with the bench unit, who was playing like okay, but like Russ had some really bad turnovers in that stretch. Um, Actually, in that game, I had a note here. Russ was the first sub for Christian in that game, which is that's a change. I don't know if it happened in like the Hawks game. I wasn't paying attention to it as much, so maybe it's like a change from like before the Wizards game or something. But previously, the first sub was either like Russ for Jamal or Julian for MPJ, or both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So Russ for CB was definitely a change in that game. And like I said, the starters and all the staggers with Jokic through that first quarter were kind of cooking and were able to, get stops, run, do all the good things that we like to see, right? But it shows that they're still tinkering with the rotation. The thing that this did impact, though, is that Malone was still playing Russ and Jamal on the bench together. And when I say still, I mean kind of going back to that, because we've talked a lot about like why has Malone like kept going back to like Russ on the bench like by himself as like the sole lead ball handler, even though like in the past he would do something different. But seems like he's kind of gone back to what we've been what I've been wanting. I don't know if you actually like subscribe to that as well, but the numbers bear out that Russ play when Jokic is off the floor, Russ is better with Jamal there. So that happened, but at the end of kind of the bench stint when Jokic comes back in the second quarter, both the guards went out of the game. And so we got some no point guard looks for a little bit. It was literally just like a few possessions because Julian was on the floor, and it was like two possessions. They struggled to score. It almost had nothing to do with like the fact they had no point guard out there, because I don't think that they were actually trying to like do Julian at point. I think they were just like, let's try posting Jokic up. Let's try posting AG up, like whatever, instead of like, ball in Julian's hands, for example. They struggled to score, and then they gave up some transition buckets on the other end. And then after like the second time, because I think Harden scores on Julian like isolation. I thought Julian's defense was fine. It was just like Harden made a tough shot. It kind of like looked like it might have been short, might rattle out, but then it like fell in, right? And then I think Malone pulls Julian, puts Peyton back in for him. And then you're like, okay, we're still no point guard, but now the spacing is even worse. They proceed to, turn the ball over like 2 or 3 more times before Malone puts Jamal back in. And then they were able to, I wouldn't say they closed the half strong, but they were able to like keep the lead, right? They lose it later in the second half, but then they regain it and obviously blow them out. So I thought that was interesting in the way that particular rotation somehow led Malone to a point when there was no point guard on the floor. In the second half, he didn't do that. He didn't do that rotation. And obviously the starters didn't even have to play the fourth quarter, so we didn't even have to see what that would look like. But Malone, almost in anticipation of it, like preempted even that and didn't sub Russ for CB in the second half. That was interesting. He subbed in for Jamal, so he wanted to keep one of those guys on the floor at all times in the second half. And obviously, because we blew them out and Stars didn't have to play the fourth quarter, Jamal played some of it just in those stagger bench minutes, but then sat the last 6 minutes or so of the game. It was clear that Malone didn't want to go back to that look again because of how much of a disaster it was, particularly against the Clippers. And it's not like I would have predicted that it would be a disaster against the Clippers, but it kind of makes sense because of how heavy a ball pressure team they are. But it's also not like they had or Julian playing point and he was turning the ball over. It was just I don't think these guys who were on the floor knew what they wanted to do with each other, honestly. And then the Clippers kind of got some stops. They were just able to get some stops out of that and then get out in transition.
How did that contrast to the Kings game? Because CB was out and, we started Russ
CB
with Jamal.
Out, yeah.
So what were the rotations like with those two starting together and having
that's a really good point. I don't think that we ever had a point where one of them was not on the floor.
It kind of felt like that, but I don't recall.
I don't recall. I need to go back to Ryan Blackburn's rotations from that game, but I don't recall. I at least don't recall thinking while watching the game, and I had to watch the Kings game after the fact because I missed most of it live. I did catch the last part, but there wasn't a point when I was watching where I was thinking oh, these offensive issues that they're having is because of the fact that there's no point. I think there was a point guard on the floor at all times in the Kings game as well.
Yeah, it was Russ and Jamal were on the court the whole game.
Yeah. So clearly Malone was we're not messing around with that again. And I'm I kind of don't blame him because it was a major disaster in the first half of that Clippers game.
It's interesting.
And again, I think it was just because they never play together. Lineup the lineup was literally Jokic, AG, MPJ, Christian, Peyton, or Christian and Julian. And actually, the only time we've seen the no point guard looks is when AG was out. That's another kind of interesting dynamic in this because obviously AG changes the geometry of the floor in that way as well. It was such a brief stint that I'm going to be honest about this. You can't really take anything from it about the no point guard looks except what Malone's reaction to it was, which was not good. The other thing about the offense, just overall, this was true with or without the point guard on the floor in the first half. The Clippers do force turnovers, but I thought that the Nuggets were incredibly sloppy with how they were moving the ball in that game. And again, I did think that a lot of people were upset while watching the game in that first half because they were blowing this lead and they were being dumb on offense and then having trouble guarding runouts, but I thought they were putting so much energy and effort in and executing. They were knowing their personnel. They were leaving the right guys open from three. It was Chris Dunn and Mo Bamba and not Norm Powell. I actually thought defensively they were putting in so much effort. Mentally, they just needed to calm down a little bit. And that's what happened in the second half. But some of the major turnovers that happened, I thought were the kind that the Clippers can force because of how they were guarding them. There was one where Russ is and he had 5 turnovers in this game. It was not, his shining moment until really that fourth quarter when he was just cooking. And he was great defensively in that game. I really think the whole team was. Mm-hmm. But Russ was forcing entry passes to Jokic, even when they were running pick and roll. And either Jokic gets a switch and he's trying to force an entry pass so that he can take advantage of that mismatch. The big is playing off of Russ. The small is also on Jokic. And then a third defender would also come in to try to make that pass difficult. And they did make that pass difficult so much so that Russ would turn the ball over. Instead of Russ recognizing that the guy in the corner is wide open because that third defender is being pulled in. And I don't think it was just Russ, to be fair. I think we've talked about this before. I think that Jokic is looking off shooters more than ever this year. I think Jamal's turnovers were just kind of weird. He's actually been one of the best assist to turnover guys on the entire team, if not the best. For the most part, he's actually done a pretty good job of finding guys. And I think Russ does a good job finding guys on the interior, but I don't think he's actually good at kick out passes, either seeing them or executing them, to be honest. And like I said, Jokic has been looking off guys, but definitely stood out to me because I think that that's how teams are going to guard us with Russ on the floor. there's a play that we're going to talk about in the Kings game where it's like in the clutch and Keon Ellis decides, probably against game plan. I think Keon rotates over to Russ and then Fox tries to go and like contest another shooter.
Both of them spread out to shooters and it was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
A little bit of a mistake there.
When that's the shot that we were going to be, that the Nuggets were going to be forced with, and above the break 3 from Russ, and he's not shooting well from above the break this season. And then Russ does the right thing and he makes the pass. He makes the entry pass to Jokic as soon as he sees that the passing lane is now the angle is now open because Keon is no longer sagging way off of him and onto Jokic in the paint.
Yeah.
But the Clippers were like, no, we're not doing that. We're gonna rotate like way over. And I think that was a problem for the Nuggets. And they did it in the second half as well, but I think the Nuggets just got even more stops and stopped turning the ball over. They were just like making smarter passes, but it wasn't like it was always going to be easy to get Jokic the ball.
Yeah.
In particular, when it's Russ being played that far off of by his own defender, in addition to the 2 guys that are on Jokic on the backside, right? So I just think that we need to do a better job as a team of getting the ball to open shooters sometimes. And that's going to sacrifice some of the, like sometimes Russ makes these like high risk, high reward, like great entry passes to Jokic. That's just been happening this season. And it works because Jokic has suction cups for hands. But I think that good defense are going to be able to read that, know that from the scouting report, know he's going to be forcing these passes. We just need to make sure that they don't get in there and we'll be fine. The other thing that the Clippers forced them into because of how they were covering the Jokic Russ 2-man game is giving Russ so much space that he had to try to score. Like, because that is the right play for like almost anybody else, but like I don't want Russ taking any shots.
Yeah.
If he can help it, unless he's like getting all the way to the rim, and he has been better about finishing his layups of late. So that's fine. But when he has to take a jump shot, it's like, even if it like wide open stuff from 15 feet, from 24 feet, it just like, it's like, I don't want to see that, but that's what teams are going to be able to force. And I think that really stood out. And that's, one of the reasons that you would be nervous about a playoff setting when it comes to the Nuggets. And if you're the front office, you're like, oh, we need another on-ball creator. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, you guys, like, just read my timeline. I've been saying this since before the offseason started. Or in particular, I was like, okay, if you're going to let KCP walk, this should be one of the things that you should be able to get somebody that can play in the playoffs. Not saying that Russ can't, but I am saying that some of the reasons that he might not be able to are starting to manifest.
Yeah.
Even though he's been great defensively, he's been great at getting Jokic the ball. I just worry that more and more of those passes are going to have to be those high risk passes. Even if he can make them, it's going to lead to, there's going to be some downside to that as well.
That's just the nature of Westbrook. Like you said it perfectly. He's going to have high risk, flashy passes, getting through tight windows. And there are times where he's consistently hitting them, and obviously sometimes they're going to lead to turnovers, and it's the same with the layups and the shots and all of his decision making. So, you covered that really well. But yeah, with Russ, let's move to the Kings game just because he started this game, and we started out incredibly hot.
Do you remember if it was the back or the quad?
It was a back strain.
It was the back, back strain.
The Nuggets started out super hot in that game. You all know how it went. AG was dominating in the first quarter. He had like 15 points and just like sealing guys and getting cross matches and just taking it to DeMar DeRozan, who can't guard him because the Kings are playing him at power forward for some stupid reason. Anyways, it was great to see for AG. I thought, wow, the Nuggets are really, turning a corner. And just to go back to your rotation idea really quick was that I thought that might have been a takeaway from the Kings game is that Russ should be the first one to come in for CB because that lineup was playing so well. But I wasn't thinking like, you bringing up the no point guard look. So it's like how much,
well, it's
how are you
clear from the Kings game then that it's possible to do both.
Even when starting them together. So it must be possible if you're bringing them off the bench. So I think that's something that they should look into for sure. Anyway, but just, first quarter was amazing. And then the second and third were not amazing. And where do you even want to begin with this Kings game? Because,
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about like what are the things you think they did right? Like the number one things that they did right in that first quarter?
I just thought, the Nuggets are always playing up to touch with Jokic. That's the thing with weak side, backside rotation help. And we've heard Matt Moore and people speculate that maybe we should play some drop with Jokic. We were doing that kind of at the beginning, which I was worried about just because DeMar DeRozan is a mid-range like specialist. I don't know how his stats are looking this season. The consistent theme of this game were people not being able to get around screens, and then the Kings pretty much just being able to take any shot they kind of wanted. But in the first quarter, they were just missing everything, and we were getting the ball and pushing it
I agree with that.
getting in transition. I don't necessarily think we were really bothering them off the screen. We fouled them sometimes off the screen, and
I think Jokic was playing a drop, but then he'd kind of come up to contest. There was something they were doing more in the second half where they would bring in like heavy nail help along with Jokic contesting while the low man was keeping Domas from getting behind to score. Because I think that Sabonis had a great night, but most of his scoring came against the bench, not so much against the starters, and his scoring was off of pick and roll. And I think the way that they were playing their matchup zone it let the guards not go off because they didn't, but get to their spots a little bit easier. But it shut down the pick and roll game with the way that they were guarding. But that was more second half. In the first half, like I don't really think that we were doing much defensively, and it caught up to them in a big way in that third quarter, especially in transition, or that second quarter, I should say, but also the third.
Yeah, for Jokic not being an amazing rim protector, you never know how job's going to work out. But, it is technically easier to play that in some regard just because, you're letting people take these shots that are prone to variance and they can miss and you can rebound. Jokic is closer to the rim in that case. And so you can have advantages. But then if people are hitting shots, you are also risking that. And that started to happen because the Kings were really cold in the first quarter and they got super hot throughout the rest of the game, and we were, giving open threes and not getting around screens.
I think it's more like transition was really bad. To be like completely honest, I think they gave up 47 points in that second quarter.
Oh, God,
and I think the main issue was that they were not scoring. And I thought it was actually worse once the starters came back onto the floor. I think when Jokic came into the game, they were still up. Like it was either 13 or 16. The bench had kind of extended the lead, but then they started to lose it again. So Jokic came back in and the offense completely changed, frankly. Like, I think they got their lead because they were just letting AG bully DeMar DeRozan because Keegan Murray was out of this game and they had nobody who could guard AG because they had to have Sabonis on Jokic. Like, they just didn't have any other choice.
Yep.
And AG was bullying DeMar, and then they stopped going to that. They kind of stopped going to that the whole rest of the game, except for one possession where AG tried to post, not late, but like late in the third quarter, post him up, and I think they got an offensive foul call, and they kind of just like, they didn't go to him at all between the second quarter and that point, but then like didn't again the whole rest of the game. And I'm like, that's like how you guys were, you should just be spamming this. But I was kind of wondering, to be honest, if they were just not wanting to like hit that, like spam that, like they were trying to run their sets and like run their offense, like work through some other things. I think that was intentional, but it was annoying as a fan to watch. But I understand part of the rationale in going away from that. It is also a lot of work for AG, but he was sealing DeMar like a lot of times too. And then kind of getting like waved off, like, hey, get out of the paint. By like Jamal or something. And then the Kings were doing a better job defending our guys on the perimeter until really like late third quarter. They weren't actually defending our cuts that well. Like, we scored 76 points in the paint in this game, and it's not because Jokic was dominating Sabonis. Like, I can tell you that. Because he was having a miserable scoring game against Domas. He was mostly attacking mismatches.
And when they were on their run in those second and third quarters and, taking the lead back, we were wondering, why aren't we going to AG or why aren't we going to Mike? Just because the offense was not as potent as it was to start the game. I think part of it is just not necessarily a sharp process. There were times where Malone just called timeouts with Jamal in the wing in the half court ready to run a play because like he just saw the offense was not doing anything.
Jamal was like on the wing, like waiting for, like nothing was happening. Nobody was moving. And Malone was like over it.
Yeah. So, but also the Kings played zone in that game, which is weird because you don't necessarily want to do that against Jokic. He's probably one of the best to defeat a zone of all, in the league.
I think that was also to try to protect DeMar a little bit too.
No, That was where I was going. Is like I think
Yeah.
that's partly why MPJ and AG didn't get more shots or attempts is just because of that
Yeah.
zone.
No,
It
that's a
could
good point.
kind of
So like they
neutralize
kind of
them.
threw off the rhythm of it to get the Nuggets away from it, and then the Nuggets, like even when they had the opportunity, once the Kings stopped playing some zone, they didn't go back to it. So that was
Yeah.
interesting.
We played zone too, and that did seem to work in some senses of slowing the Kings down a bit. And what did you think of the zone and the defensive effort, like, and how that worked?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the third quarter before I go to the
Okay,
fourth,
sure.
if that's okay. Just
Yeah.
really, I really wanted to shout out Russ for this
Okay.
because the body language was really bad after the Kings retook the lead in kind of the early third quarter. Like you said, there was a play. There were like consecutive timeouts happening because Malone was like, "You guys aren't running your off. You're like not even running the offense." Jokic was having a miserable time trying to score on Sabonis. Like I thought Domas did a really good job given the amount of physicality that he was allowed to play with. It was very Bam-esque, where his whole job was to just like be up on Jokic and keep him from getting to his spots the whole time. Part of the reason that AG was able to eat so easily, and Domas isn't like the best rim protector or anything like that, but he has a big body and he can be a presence down there, but he couldn't be because Jokic was kind of like standing out there and Domas was like not dropping back at all. He was just like on him, making sure that he couldn't get to any spot easily. And when Jokic tried to post him up, it was miserable. But in the third quarter, Russ was doing literally everything he could to just kind of will them to stay in the game. And I thought that that was a really good illustration of what he's been bringing to the team. And the Kings were going on this massive extended run that continued on from that second quarter, right? And Golden One Center was getting really loud. And I talked about we did our rankings of the best home courts, and I said last year I would have said the Sacramento's number one, but they hadn't been, as like fired up as I remember them being, even in the playoffs against the Warriors in that series a couple of years ago. But in this game, like Golden One Center was on like hot fire while the Kings were going on this run. And for Russ to will the team back into the game with big plays in transition, he was just getting to the rim, ISOing guys and getting to the rim and like finishing at the rim, not just getting there, which was really great. There was a great, lob to AG when he drew some help in a pick and roll situation with Jokic, which is nice. Like it's nice to see Russ being able to make reads other than get ball to Jokic, which is part of what we were just talking about with the Clippers game. And then at the end of the third quarter, Jamal gets a good stop on Fox, and then he comes in with the bench and he's trying to make important plays. And again, a lot of this is like just getting back into the game because the Kings had retaken the lead at that point after the Nuggets had led by like 23 in that second quarter, right? And you talk about like, yeah, when Jokic is dropping back that much, you leave yourself vulnerable to jump shots. And Sabonis made like a couple of floaters. He made a couple of middies, but there was this big pick and pop three that he hit with 3 minutes left to give
Just
the
wild.
Kings an 8-point lead. Again, with 3 minutes left in the clutch, they stopped going to Jokic in the post, which I was like, thank goodness, because this was just not working all game. Like he was like Sabonis was really good in that matchup. It was very, like I said, kind of Bam-esque, except I think Jokic has an easier time against Bam in the post than Sabonis in the post, and maybe it would be different if Bam ever went against Jokic in a Mark Davis officiated game. But
Oh God, yeah.
in the clutch, it was a lot of Jamal. He had been in that fourth quarter before Jokic came back in, getting them back in the game, running pick and roll with DeAndre Jordan. In the early fourth quarter, missing shots, but he was generating really good shots out of pick and roll with DJ. Then Jokic comes back in. It's a lot more ball in the hands of Jamal. The Nuggets had gotten in the bonus, and so Jamal got some free throws on a drive when Sabonis fouls him. I don't remember if maybe he'd gotten a switch and was attacking that switch in isolation, which was interesting. There was another play where Jokic, I think, gets a switch in the post, draws a double, and then I think it was DeMar was on Russ, and maybe it was Fox misses him, and then Russ is able to cut right to the rim, and Jokic obviously makes that pass for a layup. And love to see Russ finishing layups. Like I said, it all feels like found money.
Yeah, it really does.
And obviously with CB out of this game, you have Russ closing again, and I always have questions about what it's going to look like with Russ closing with the starters. What the offense is going to look like in particular. Jokic he hit the big pick and pop three off a great drive from Jamal. There were actually multiple drives from Jamal. And obviously Russ has been driving really well in this game.
Oh my God.
But like I said, he's not the best at kicking out, except he'll usually hit Jokic on that pop. Jamal doesn't always hit Jokic on the pop, right? But he did, and he drew the big with him on this great drive. Like he got past his man, and Jokic obviously hits the three. It was his first made three of the game.
Yeah.
So he'd actually been bombing threes in this game. I think it's because he was tired of trying to battle Sabonis inside.
And they just like were a little bit rough looks. Like they weren't the easy ones where he was wide open. He was like, all right, I'm going to
Yes,
take
I
them.
do think that the unique challenge of Sabonis, particularly when he's allowed as much physicality as he was inside in this game, but I think Jokic didn't handle that well, to be completely honest. But even on the outside, he's quick enough to recover to contest Jokic's shots on the outside. This particular one, I think Jamal did a really good job of drawing the help like really deep in before he kicked out to Jokic.
Yeah.
And so he had plenty of time to take and make that shot. And so that was big. But that's the difference. Like when we talk about Jokic's shooting, like the difference between a shooter and a non-shooter, not that Jokic is a non-shooter, but I wouldn't classify him as a shooter, is that they can hit the contested looks, semi-contested looks just as comfortably as the wide open ones.
Well, Jokic in 23 when we won the chip was hitting everything.
That's true.
But,
that was that was special. And then you want to talk about the last offensive possession of this game because it was just vintage stuff.
Man, yeah, it was just the two-man game again. And I mean, just to your point, Russ has been having success with Jokic in two-man game because he has that explosive ability to get around and really drive in to the defense and then get it to Jokic. Maybe not as good as the pick and pop and all that, but whatever. You know, Jamal had that, you just talked about that crazy over the head pass for the pick and pop, but I just thought Jamal was better and more shifty. And in that play, like it was multiple actions going back and forth to each other where it was getting covered up. And Jamal just hit a mid-range, 16-foot shot and just a tough shot maker. And so it's just another example after the ones you just listed of Jamal looking the way that we want him to look.
And I said earlier, like that early in the fourth quarter, he was missing some really good looks. He also made a few with the bench before Jokic came back in, because actually the Kings kind of went on a mini run after Jokic came back in, and then we had to come back again from that. But he hit two big threes, one of them crossing Fox up kind of around a DeAndre Jordan screen and getting wide open. It was very similar to when we did our Nuggets rewind of the Boston Celtics game, very similar to the play where Jamal just kind of gets Tatum on a kind of a hesitation right outside of the screen, and then it comes off the other side and then drains a wide open three that way. It was interesting to see him do it again with Fox. Fox can be a really good perimeter defender just because of how quick he is, and he's skinny enough to get around screens. And so when he's really engaged on that end, like it can be difficult to just shake him. Like he's not like, Caruso or anything, but he can be like kind of he can bother you. And Jamal was able to shake him. And it was interesting. There was one play in this game where I think Jamal was actually able to get by him entirely, which is really tough because Fox is so quick and he's very laterally quick too. So just being able to get by him can be tough. Like you have to attack him in other ways most of the time, but Jamal was able to do that. And I just think that like we're starting to see signs physically of Jamal being closer to the shape that we need him in to make a deep playoff run. And hopefully to make a run in the regular season such that we can, get, home court advantage in a couple of rounds or something like that too. So I had a couple of questions just about the overall on the last two games. And the first one I have it has to do with this Jokic and Sabonis matchup, because in both games, Jokic had like his two worst games of the season before and after Jokmas, right? And I just want to know, what do you think is like the most effective way for Jokic to attack Sabonis and Zubac? Because one-on-one in the post, I've seen that, especially the Zubac matchup, I've seen that just like over and over again, both this year and last year, that it's not easy for him. Like it's not the slam dunk that Nuggets fans would like it to be, or some would like to think it is.
It was consistent with Jokic and Murray where they were struggling in the mid portion of the game, and it's just a testament to both of them where even if you're struggling with tough matchups or you're just not having a good night, like you still have to find a way to score and try to find a way to win. And, Jokic was doing some tough one-on-ones with Sabonis and shooting over it. I think he's still going to have to go one-on-one and you're going to have to win some of them. I don't think that's the most viable strategy to do all the time.
Like, what should you think he should be like one-on-one in the post? Like, do you think
one-on-one in the
have
post,
you
like
seen?
being
Okay.
really physical, using his body, pushing him. It's versus Sabonis, maybe less so Zubac. I think it's harder. He's just bigger. I think though, like probably the answer is just having a better and more consistent two-man game again. Like, you got to be a real threat as
To relieve some of
Jamal.
that pressure.
You got to be, Jamal's got to get back. He's got to be a real threat to like open it up more for Jokic on pocket passes, or like he's got to be a threat to actually draw Sabonis over and such. Maybe they stick to Jokic like we've seen that with the Wolves where they're funneling, but it's not like the Kings have another dude they can just funnel to.
Exactly.
That'd be like my best guess. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. We talked about this with the Wolf series, right? Obviously, Cat's out east now, and I think his worst worst matchups in the West are Zubac and Sabonis in terms of just like one-on-one in the post, like where his bread and butter. Out east, it's like Cat and like Wendell Carter Jr. and then Isaiah Stewart on the Pistons, which doesn't matter because it's the Pistons, right? Hopefully. He doesn't get traded to somebody in the West because I think that's a really annoying one. But when we talked about it before the Wolves series and during it, one of the things that was most effective with Cat, and I think it's like this is more applicable to Zubac, is like hitting Jokic on the move can be a lot more effective because even though those guys are big, they're not as fleet of foot as Jokic is. Even if you don't think that Jokic is very fleet of foot, but he can beat a lot of guys when he's got like a head of steam and he's already on the move. If he can, catch you off guard that way. But that requires like somebody like a Russ on your team who's going to always hit you on hit Jokic on those face cuts, and because he's constantly moving off the ball. I actually thought in this game versus the Kings, it was also true versus Sabonis that a lot of the ways that he was able to score is when he was able to be on the move. You talked about like Jamal being able to open some things up with the pocket pass and Jokic kind of diving on the roll and being able to attack Sabonis that way. But there were also some other kinds of off-ball cuts. When you think about it, a pick and roll when the big is rolling, that's just another example of an off-ball cut, basically, and like trying to catch somebody on the move and catch a defender off guard that way. But there were other off-ball cuts that Jokic was able to make. And then he was either scoring like a bucket on those or he was getting free throws when they hit him, even when Sabonis is guarding him. That's part of the reason that the most important thing that I think Sabonis did all night was stay attached to Jokic and didn't let him, he didn't get a lot of those opportunities throughout the game, but there were small pockets throughout the game where he was moving off ball, getting open that way. And Russ in particular, and even Jamal were like hitting him on the move. Even MPJ is able to do it sometimes when he's able to make that entry pass quick enough. But I think those guys are tough matchups. And I think that it's worth just kind of filing that away for, future reference. Okay, other question here. How can the Nuggets counter teams forcing the ball into Russ's hands, as we talked about when it came to that Clippers game? I already talked about this example here where Russ ends up passing up a three when Keon comes out to contest him and then just gets Jokic the ball anyway, right? But like we talked about, it's going to be difficult sometimes to do that when teams are like playing you for that pass. So he's either going to have to score or get the ball to somebody else. I like the idea of him getting the ball to somebody else more than him scoring, to be completely honest. And I think he's done a good job. Like I said, with these interior passes, not just when he's on the interior, but when MPJ is cutting, right? Or the lob to Aaron Gordon that he made in the Kings game during that third quarter run where he's run pick and roll with Jokic and everyone's converging on him. And then he draws DeMar in help and then is able to get the lob to AG. But I think he's also got to work on some kickouts to shooters. And I don't know if he's going to when I say he's got to work on it, I need to see it. Like, he's 36, and I don't know how much his game is actually going to change, but I need to see if he's able to make that pass consistently. It's not that he never kicks out, it's that he kind of waits until the last possible second to kick out. He's always looking for like every other option before he does that. And so that's just something I'm keeping in the back of my head. There was also a play in the Clippers game where Jamal, there were a lot of plays in the Clippers game in the second half, especially where Jamal is the one running pick and roll, and Russ is operating off ball, which is like, that's a whole can of worms that you can open. But there's this play where it ends up with Jamal runs pick and roll with DJ. Three defenders, they try to guard that 3-on-2. Russ is kind of running around the perimeter. It's almost like he's running off a pin down on the opposite wing, and Jamal is able to do almost like a cross court pass to Russ to basically just reverse the ball to the other side of the floor. But Russ is like attacking off the catch now instead of just stand still, like ready to shoot. So the defender's not paying attention to him at all because he was kind of the third guy that was in guarding the pick and roll with Jamal and DJ. So Russ is able to run in, and this didn't count as an assist for Jamal, but because Russ then tries to lob it into DJ, but it hits the bottom of the rim. But Russ gets the offensive rebound, and then but I think it would have been a really interesting. I still think it's an interesting idea to just have Russ like just be on the move more, because if you get that ball when you're on the move, they won't be able to make you shoot because you're going to be able to just attack off the drive. And then the question is more like, is he going to be able to finish at the rim? And I don't know, but he's been finishing at the rim a little bit more now, and that's been good. And even if he isn't, he's probably going to be able to draw help and make some kind of interior, just like a shovel pass to the big or whoever. So I think that's one interesting way that I didn't expect to see from Russ. But it's one way that these like Jamal, Russ bench units have been able to operate a little bit, is with the two of them kind of trading off ball handling duties, but keeping the other one involved in the action. It's not just kind of going 1-on-1 or I'm running pick and roll and you're just like off being a spacer, even though like sometimes that is Jamal and that's like the best thing for Jamal because he is the better shooter of the two.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost treat it like a zone in a way where, I mean, if he's being played off of, like forcing the ball in his hands, he can attack that gap a little bit, try to draw any help he can, and then just either swing it or, you've talked about him trying to kick out to shooters. That's going to have to improve. I also think of like ways that we've done it with Aaron Gordon when he's been left with the ball, which is like run a little DHO or something. Obviously, he's not a big guy. I'd assume if he was playing with AG, for example, he may not be being stayed home on the three on the perimeter, whether he's on the weak side or not. Could try to skip past to him or something and then run some kind of action with him and MPJ or anything like that.
But they've been playing so fast, like their offensive possession length is like, it's not just the pace of the team. Sometimes pace is like, oh, their defense has just been bad, which it has been. But also their offensive they're like fifth in offensive possession length this season. So I think they're not very methodical at the moment.
I guess I'm thinking I'm more concerned about this for playoffs and such.
I agree with you, and I'm citing this as like a concern.
I know it's hard. It's a tough one. It may not be something we can overcome. It may be like something that's just a weakness, but we'll see how Russ plays out of it and what problems he solves.
Okay, so last thing, I just wanted to address the fact that DeAndre Jordan has become the de facto backup center, at least for now. I don't know how if that's going to change as the schedule becomes more dense, because they've basically been playing they played like 4 games in the last 2 weeks. And he's been playing backup center. My number one concern with this is, and will continue to be, that DeAndre Jordan's going to wear down and then the play is going to be diminished. But for now, like, he's defensive rebounding and that's been good. And he's just running pick and roll with both, operating pick and roll with Jamal and Russ, and just kind of giving them an offensive option off the bench. Like, the bench has been able to score because DJ screens and rolls.
Yeah.
And even like there are a couple of possessions where he's like running DHOs with Julian. Julian hits like a really tough 3. This was in the Kings game off of DHO from DJ, and it was like off a broken play. I think Peyton gets DJ the ball back after maybe an offensive rebound, and DJ is like, okay, let me like get this to Julian, set him a little screen, and Julian hits like a tough semi-contested three there, you can run kind of coherent basketball when you have a real center on the floor who can screen and rebound. I think he's got the best defensive rebounding percentage on the team by far.
I love that obviously he's not the position or player that we want necessarily long term, and even this season and whatever into the playoffs. Just because there's a ton of concerns and he's older and such. But I love that he's like doing well for now and serviceable, and it's an option to at least go to. And Russ is more familiar with him as a type of rolling big than Saric, who I don't know what synergy they've even developed, if they've developed any or not, because they've not played together very much. So if that's what we have to do for now, I mean, I said it on Twitter before. I was like, why don't we just play DJ more? Like, why not?
All right, let's move on to our predictions for the next 10 games. All right, so for the first game, it's going to be at Portland. They're actually in Portland right now. I've got this as a W because it's Portland. And even though we talked about Portland as like an interesting young core, we also talked about how they actually suck. So this should be a W. If this is another L, like, all right, it's time to trade everybody.
Oh God! Now we're trading MBJ for Levine. No, I'm kidding. I'm gonna say W as well. I think we're gelling right now. We got some positivity going, and Jamal did have his big game winner against the Blazers last season. He already had a game winner against the Kings.
He's a game early this year, as it turns out. But against the Kings.
Hopefully, he just carries that Kings confidence over into the Blazers, and I just think it's a good get-right opportunity game for the Nuggets. Like, I'm pretty positive on how we're going to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, New Orleans Pelicans. I've got this as a dub as well. If we're serious, we gotta beat the Pelicans. Can't lose to them twice. Can't lose to them twice in one season.
I'm saying a W. But it's away.
It's at New Orleans. Like, we got to make up for our relative to the altitude advantage mediocre home record with a better road record. I think we're like one game above 500 on the road right now. So this is an opportunity, I mean, honestly, to, up the road record a little bit more and, show some mettle on the road, because we might be on the road a lot in the playoffs more than we'd like to be.
All right. Well, what do you got for
All right. Phoenix? So for the first Phoenix game, which you are going to in person, Will, I've got this as an L, and I'm going to be really annoyed. I don't think the Phoenix Suns are like a legit team, but this has just been an annoying team for the Nuggets like ever since forever. And I will be annoyed when they lose this game, but I will not be at all surprised when they do. It'll just be annoying that they lost another home game, especially to this team that I detest so much. But I'll just put this down right now that I think they're going to win the game at Phoenix on Christmas Day. And that will make me feel great, because if you beat Phoenix on Christmas Day, you win the Western Conference. And that's been the case for the last 4 years.
That's so funny. What a weird coincidence.
I wonder what happens if Phoenix actually wins their Christmas Day game. Does that mean they win the conference?
Apparently, yes. I think that's what we'd have to logically deduce.
And if it goes the other way, I'll just be like, whatever. It's not real. The curse isn't real.
Well, let's be real, it isn't real. But
I mean,
I don't believe in stuff like that. But, whatever. I'm going the opposite just because I'm going to the game, and I have not gone to a Nuggets loss in a while. And I do feel better about them being at home. I think that was part of like the Clippers like intensity in our better defense. I just feel like we were at home and we've been on the road for so long, and I think we were able to put in that effort.
Okay, versus Cleveland, I chickened out, and I have this as a toss-up. This is just true. Even when the Nuggets are great, they trick off these Eastern Conference home games. They lost to the Knicks at home in the title year. They obviously lost to the Knicks at home this year. So maybe that's the omen. They might want to get their get back after, like, I actually thought they played pretty hard in that last Cavs game. They just got outclassed. And I'm curious to see. I'm more curious about this game than anything. I don't have a real prediction for it.
I'm gonna say a loss. I just think I am not confident we're gonna be able to beat the Cavs yet. So yeah, I
need them to come back down to earth just a little bit more before I feel like we could beat them in a regular season game. But our defense in the last one was good. It was just like you guys got to finish. You got to make your paint attempts.
Yeah.
All right, Detroit, I've got that as a W. I wouldn't be surprised if they get kind of caught off guard by the Pistons, to be honest. And the Pistons are bad, don't get me wrong, but they're not nearly as bad as they were last year. And it might surprise them to, that Detroit's playing coherent basketball. Cade's been really good. They might, catch like a hot shooting night, something like that. But I think that should obviously be a W for us. But like I said, Isaiah Stewart is not like an easy matchup for Jokic either. So I have this as a W, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lose it.
I know, right? We've been losing to bad East teams. But I'm going to say W just because we're at home again. Like, I think I'd expect more to lose to them if it was a road game.
Time to reclaim. Time to bring back Ball Arena. Okay, we have Utah. I've got this as a dub. This is at Utah again. I just think Utah is so bad this year that not even the Nuggets curse at Utah can change that.
Yeah, I agree.
You also have that as a dub.
They're just way too bad.
Versus Atlanta, this is a W. We just smacked that team last time. Look, Jalen Johnson didn't play, to be fair, and they missed a bunch of shots. But we're at home. This is one I probably feel it even more than with the Detroit game, that they might be caught off guard in this game. But I also just don't think the Hawks are that good. And I think we showed that when we played them last time, even though they were missing Jalen Johnson. We should win it, but I won't be surprised if they get caught off just because they've got good players on that team. It is also at home. I just think we should win. Atlanta has a terrible road record.
I'm going to say win as well. I probably
should have put more of these as toss-ups.
I am nervous with Jalen Johnson playing, but I feel pretty good. Yeah, I think their road record is pretty bad.
Yeah, so versus Spurs and at Spurs are the last 2 games before the Nuggets go on an East Coast road trip. I've got them losing the first game against the Spurs because I think the Spurs are playing a lot better than a lot of people think. And the Nuggets are definitely going to underestimate them. But then they're going to win the one at San Antonio. And I keep having these pairs where I think they're going to lose the home game and then win the road game. Maybe because I've just been jaded by how much they've losing at home. But yeah. So you agree with that?
I think I'm actually just going to go with double losses to the Spurs because I'm just feeling a little pessimistic about the Nuggets.
Okay, so you've got them going 6-4 over this next stretch, and I've got them either 7-3 or 8-2 if they pull out the Cavs win before their East Coast road trip, and it's a rather long East Coast road trip. We'll get to that when that comes, but I think this next 10 game stretch will tell us a lot about Denver. If they go 7-3, I think that's a really strong record against a schedule that, they should be able to do. And anything better than that is okay, maybe the Nuggets are back. So we'll see how they perform against, they should take care of business against the bad teams and then show us that they can outclass some of these middle tier teams that they're going to face, which really is just Phoenix. Cleveland is kind of above it, so whatever. But they should definitely smack Atlanta and San Antonio, and then take care of all the bad teams, and then we'll see what happens with the Phoenix games.
Yep, but it should be a good stretch for the Nuggets, I think, either way. So,
but in terms of being MVP favorite. Obviously, Will and I would be rooting for our guy Nikola Jokic. But you and I got into an interesting back and forth the other day on kind of in response to Hardwood Knocks. Shout out to Dan and Grant. Love those guys on that show. Definitely check them out. Will, why don't you explain the controversy and then we can kind of just talk about it? I don't know.
Yeah.
The question. Explain the question, and then we can kind of go through it in less controversial.
The question is talking about how many wins we would have to win if Jokic was going to win MVP, because as we know, if you get a certain seed that's pretty low, it's just an anomaly historically for MVPs to win when you're a very low seed, unless you do something really crazy, like when Russ averaged a triple-double, things like that.
Or when I think they were the same seed that the Nuggets were when when Jokic won his second MVP, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were the sixth seed
that year. Yeah.
But Grant had a funny take that I also agreed with, and I reposted it just because he was like, I don't care how many games. They could win 30 games. I'd still give Jokic the MVP.
I think they were so inspired by you reposting it that they used it as promo for their show too.
Because I just clicked it and I linked the episode underneath, which if you haven't listened to it, like their show's awesome. So if you're listening and you're hearing this, go
Yeah.
check them out. And then they reposted it. And I had even tweeted something similar to that. It's just hard because he's already won 3. So it's like, you know, we should retire from the discourse because he doesn't really need more. You know what I mean? But my whole thing is I'm like, dang, I'm super into how well he's playing. And I even want to make maybe more of a point to talk about him more, even on this show, just because I think it's like he's the one piece that
Maybe we do it after a couple of better games than he's had.
Yeah,
but I would be down for that also.
Yeah, just because, you know, you can take him for granted and we have other pieces they're the questions of the team, whereas Jokic is not. So I think I've been sucked back into the MVP discourse where I do want him to win again just because of what he's doing. And I've always said if he averages a triple-double, I want him to win it because they gave it to Russ for that. Clearly, like the circumstances were different. No one had ever done it in a while since Russ has done it, and maybe triple doubles are becoming more common.
I mean, Luka is also racking them up. Jalen Johnson's got a few. We had Cade Cunningham, so they are becoming a little bit more common.
Yeah, for sure. Granted, this is early. If we stop the season now, I would strongly argue Jokic is the clear player who should win it.
Stop the count.
Yeah, but so when Grant was saying that, I was like, I agree with this. Like at this point, like I don't. It's hard to say that no one can catch Jokic and it's over with so many games left, obviously. But if things hold how they are through the rest of the season, obviously you'd be making the same types of arguments because.
So if they hold for the rest of the season and like the Nuggets continued at this win rate, so where are they in the standings right now? They're sitting at 5th, right? We got OKC at number 1. So let's talk through just kind of briefly. Like the main candidates are obviously Jokic, SGA. Giannis is definitely in conversations, especially with the Bucks playing better, and who knows how much higher they could climb in the East standings with the struggles the Magic have had with their injuries and all that. Luka, obviously, I was like, I'm just trying to think of names here with Dallas stuff. Probably poised. Like I would, if I were a betting woman, I'd probably say that Dallas is on track to be the 2nd seed in the Western Conference, even though they're not right now. Either 2nd or 3rd. I think Houston is probably not going to drop off too much. Is there anybody that I'm missing? I think probably Jason Tatum, obviously in the East with the Cavs, and the Knicks are also like climbing up. So it's like, is it Brunson or is it Cat? Like both are playing really well this season. I think Cat's having a career year, as long as he can stay healthy, right? Now, look, we could be like, let's say what if the Thunder hit a skid and then the Rockets end up in the 1 seed? I'd probably like skip them, because I think that, you know, like a Luka or a Jokic are more important to their team, as like because it's an individual award, it's not a team award. Like, I think one of the things you said in our online back and forth was like your prize for the best record is the 1 seed. I forget if that was you or Dan.
Oh, I definitely didn't say that.
Okay, so it might have been Dan. Your prize for the best record is the 1 seed. This is an individual award, and I think that's a fair point to make, which is why you would skip over like teams that are like overall good teams. That's why the Celtics, like nobody from the Celtics was really an MVP candidate last year. I know like Tatum was like on ballots, but he didn't even make top 5. Brunson beat him out for that. So and Brunson had like a lot of circumstances with the Knicks going on last year, and he really like put that team on his back, right, to make them the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference is crazy. But the East was pretty injured last year, so even the super injured Knicks were able to climb up that high. My main point that I just wanted to make here was that I do think that there is a threshold of games that the team needs to win with Jokic, that Jokic needs to help the team win, him to win MVP. As in light of especially the individual performances that other guys on teams that are winning more with them are putting up. Obviously, the year that Jokic won as a 6th seed, I think that this was like a great shout out for Poissonian Distribution on Twitter. Great account. They've pointed out that basically every year that the MVP award for the last like 20 years or something, if you look at the top 3 candidates, the guy who won the most games was like in the game and their team won one out of those top three. And that was like the 23 season was the anomaly because Joel missed a bunch of games and he still won MVP. And even though his team
Right.
had I forget if the Sixers actually had a better record, but they were like, no, the Nuggets were the higher seed in the West also. So it was
Yeah.
like they might have had a better record as a team, but Joel missed games and they won games without him. So it was like that, right? So that's like part of it. And that has stuck with me just in terms of like the precedent of the award. And it's not that I care so much about precedent that I'm not willing to like rewrite a rule, but I think it told me that one of the things that this award is supposed to value is helping your team win games, not just winning your minutes, but winning games. And obviously the minutes that you're off matter too, as we've talked about. If you're winning your minutes enough to help your team win games, like that matters a lot, right? Because the whole point of the regular season is to win games, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the most valuable thing you can do is to help your team win games. And so that's why I'm like kind of laser focused on win total. It's not that I care, like I'm not like locked into seeding like as a concept. Like I don't necessarily care about that. But the idea is you help your team win games and you rise high enough in the seed in the standings so that you have a high seed. Like the best thing you could do is give your team like, first seed in the conference, have home court advantage all the way through the playoffs, like all of that stuff. That's like, wow, that's super valuable to us as a team, right? To have won, like that's the value that you're giving us is these wins. And it's not just the winning your minutes. So it's like the constant translation of that to the actual wins. And so that's why I think that there should be a fewest number of games that the Nuggets could win that is like a real number. Because I think like Grant was kind of exaggerating in his sort of monologue about this, where he said like, I don't care if they win 30 games. I'm like, that's just, he's not winning MVP if they win 30 games. If they win 30 games, they'll be like, what is it, like 13th in the conference or something?
But that's also not going to happen. The Nuggets are going to win more
right.
than 30
It's also not. It's also not going to happen. But then it sort of made me think like, what is the fewest number of games? Or like the reason I was focused on seeding is because we don't know what number of games you'll need to get a certain seed. And I think that's the ultimate like goal is to be at a certain point in the standings. So that's why I ask that.
I think it also matters like how far away you are from other seeds around you. Like if you're 6, but the second seed's like 2 games away, you have a much better case of being like, we're a
which I think
seed.
Was the case in the year that he won his second MVP, right? Like it was like a game and a half out of like third or something.
I don't remember the numbers, but it was close. Yeah.
I think he won the most games out of like the top 3 candidates also, because like he was just in every. He like played more games than those other guys and helped their team win. His team needed him to be on the floor to win.
I think he used to. So, he played like every game that season or something almost. I think he played 82 games.
But like MPJ and Jamal out, like that whole narrative was like, I think that was like legit because it's not like you're missing starters. And those guys, you don't get that cap space back to sign like replacement level players even. You're just left with who's left on your roster.
Yeah, for sure.
So that is different. And he was able to elevate guys around him to a point where he was like, had the best net rating on court of like all the, top MVP candidates that year. And, carried a team to the playoffs that had no business making the playoffs. So, yeah, obviously I'm not arguing with his MVP case that year.
I mean, you had a good point, too, where you're saying, Jokic isn't the runaway favorite. He's not the only one because there's other cases for guys. And that's cool.
That's my thing is like, if you're gonna buck precedent that way, because like if you were to like, let's say the Nuggets were like even the 8th seed, I just think that's too low because you're in the play-in at that point. You might not even make it into the playoffs unless it's literally like a game's difference between 8 and like 5. But even then, like, I just think I think that's tough because there are other guys that helped their teams get to higher seeds and had great individual performances as well and have their own individual impact to help their teams. It's not like you're facing it's not like a bunch of dynasties up there necessarily. Like, obviously, no one from like the KD Warriors was going to be considered for MVP, for example, or even though, like, I think LeBron won MVP when he was on the Heatles.
Yeah, I think he
So they
did.
didn't care then, but I don't think he had like super stiff competition.
There is that trend now where if you are on a really good team with a lot of all-stars or like superstars, you're not going to get MVP, even though I didn't like argue this. And I'm not saying I believe this, but like when I think of SGA, I'm like, wow, he's on such a complete team. So like they're going to have,
Defensively, yeah, but we just saw
yeah,
offensively, like they
I
need
know.
him
Yeah.
to get those buckets.
It actually was so funny because right after us like arguing this, like Jokic had a bad-ish game against the Kings and
It was
SG.
awful. I think the Kings game was the Kings game worse than the Clippers game? I think it was.
I still think Jokic was better than
Because
people were saying,
he was
but
better
yeah.
defensively in the Clippers game. He was good defensively in both, like at least decent in the Kings game. He was really good in the Clippers game, I thought, defensively, but he was
I mean,
like really bad offensively in both. And I'm not out here trying to make other guys MVP cases was the other thing. So the only way that I could go at this was really like poking holes at Jokic's case because I didn't feel like making the SGA case or the Tatum case, but it was like the only reason I'm doing this is because it's true that these other guys are having like really important standout seasons for their teams.
yeah, and that's why I was like, wait, what's going on? Why are we poking holes in Jokic's case?
Yeah, it was because
Which started the
I
thing.
was like too lazy and too much of a hater to actually like make the positive case for these other guys. Because I
Right.
also don't want them to win. Like I want the
Yeah.
Nuggets to be. This is also like there was like an internal motivator of like I want the Nuggets to just be good enough that this isn't a question. So I'm kind of annoyed at the suggestion of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for
Right.
sure.
Like I understand Nuggets fans definitely having a sort of and I'm leaving here with something feeling about this
Yeah.
season based on how it started and maybe how it's going. We'll see over the next decades. I do want the season to end on like a stronger note, whether they win a championship or not, because like when this team like plays together and like plays with joy and all of that, that also means that Jokic is having fun. Like I don't like to picture Jokic like winning his fourth MVP on this like misery
And being
season
pissed off. Well,
and being pissed
yeah.
off. Yeah.
No matter what circle you're in, fan, voter, whatever, you know, your the way you conceptualize Jokic as an MVP is kind of like a referendum on the team a bit, and it's hard to like reconcile some of this where you're thinking, well, the Nuggets are
Yeah.
so bad around the margins that they need Jokic to create all this value, and that's where the value is coming from. So then you're essentially saying the rest of the team's kind of shitty. Maybe not so bluntly, but in some way you can argue that. But
Right, because like they kept citing the on-off case as like, and it is his strongest case, but I think the better like it's his strongest case if if you believe in weighing the on-offs as much as you do.
yeah,
But especially if you're like, well, I'm not going to care about the wins, then it's like, well, I don't care about the off numbers then. But if you're using the on offs as like it's just the explanation for why it's not more wins, then fine. But I'm not going to weight the on offs as much when I'm measuring his individual impact, even though I obviously know that it's high. Like we've
Yeah.
cited this stuff so much. But the other thing that Jokic has been the narrative or the argument that Jokic has been the beneficiary of for the last few years is he raises everybody up around him to be better. And I believe that. I think that's even true this year. But obviously, he can only do so much.
Yeah, but
because some guys on the team have been struggling. And I'm not saying
yeah,
it's not me blaming him for other guys not being as good. It's just me bringing up like, hey, like this is an argument that that you guys have used in the past to make his case. So it's like, well, was he not actually doing as much to raise those other guys up as we thought? And it actually mattered to have like some good players around him. Turns out, yes. But it was just me kind of poking a bit at that particular argument for him
well,
because it'd been used in the past, and it's clearly like not as powerful this year, right?
with Facu Campazzo and that whole roster that was like real trash. I think they were still older players. So if Jokic is improving them, I think I'm thinking, is it easier for him to make someone better when they're vets versus young guys?
I think if someone knows how to do something, if they're like high IQ player and they know how to do something, even if they're limited in like a variety of ways, he can maximize the thing that they do the best.
Yeah.
But if you're a young player that is still trying to figure yourself out and you don't know what you're good at yet,
Yep.
that's harder. And I
it's
think
like
we're seeing that with
Jokic.
like a Peyton Watson, for example.
Yeah, and Jokic can't. That's like a coaching thing. That's definitely not something Jokic can do. Although I'm sure he like
And like
offers
just general
advice,
player development. Sure. Yeah.
and you're developing what you are good at, but also learning to play Jokic ball at the same
Yeah.
time. But like, I guess my only point was like, I am more in favor of trying to just like determine that even if we can't really quantify this, what the true value is that a single player provides to a team. And there's all kinds of stats, and this is why this whole thing is so hard to argue. And we use different things every year, and why it's not just stats that determines it, it's narrative and all this stuff, and why it's
Yeah.
complicated.
Of course, it's narrative that determines it. The media literally votes on this award. It is a media-driven award ever since they, switched over to the media being the main voters of this.
And part of the narratives, like we brought up before, well, the Nuggets are not very good, and Jokic is making them good again, rather than him being, the Nuggets have the best starting five in the league, and Bruce Brown, and he should win MVP because they're so good. I don't love the best team, best player idea. I think it is phasing
I mean,
out.
obviously, like we weren't going to give it to like Tatum last year.
Yeah.
That would have been ridiculous.
So it's phasing out. I was
Also, the
thinking,
Nuggets were awesome last year, and we're in the tougher conference, so that's why I look at seed more than wins total. Also, that's another reason to look at seed more than wins.
it's kind of like the individual player requirement, the 65 games you have to play to even be considered for MVP. There's like an unwritten, like maybe you should win a certain amount of games if your team to be considered. And I also don't like, I'm getting to a point where I'm ready to not blame Jokic for anything or criticize the man. And I know that some people
Yeah.
want to be objective and that's great. And we can criticize players and stuff and talk about how Jokic
I mean, there's
maybe,
nothing to blame or criticize him for this season besides like the last two games offensively. He's had some games where he was bad on defense, but it was like when everybody was bad on defense, and like this whole. But he's not like there have been more games in the past where this is like you could like this loss was on Jokic.
yeah.
Although I do think it might have been the first Dallas game and they ended up winning it, and I was like, ooh, that wasn't like a great start, but they finished strong and won it. Maybe it was the second Dallas game where they lost. But sometimes you do have a Jokic loss, right? But no, like I see your point. Like I get it. But I think that when you're talking about most valuable, I think the value has to matter somewhere. It can't just be like on the stat sheet. And I think the value of a valuable player is helping your team win, not just your minutes, but games.
Yeah.
And I think that like I get it. You don't play all 48 minutes. One of the things I do want to point out over the last couple of games, though, is that the bench has actually been like decent. They're not like winning their minutes, but they're not nearly as much big of a disaster as they had been. I think part of that is because we're just playing DJ, and we looked at the net rating stuff before, and when DJ's on the floor, like he's the backup big that has the least bad net rating. He can screen, he can rebound, that sort of like, and that. It's all you need to be able to do to play with Jamal and Russ and spell Jokic for a few minutes. And I do think that more scrutiny is going to start to be coming on the starting lineup, which is still really good. It's still one of the best lineups in the league, as we've discussed. But, early in the season, we were talking about it being like a plus 18, and I never expected that to last. But they're down to plus 13 now. And I'm kind of watching to see, like, how far is that going to fall? Like, how well have they been playing? They've been getting out to good starts in these games. Some of the, like, second quarter closing hasn't been as good, but they usually bounce back, and that's been, good. But that's the kind of thing that, they're probably evaluating when they try to decide if there are going to be trades and,
and we knew Christian
whatever
Brown wasn't going to keep shooting 50% from three. So
that's true. And the defense like needed to improve, because even Malone said it was after the Heat game where he's like, you're not always going to shoot as well as you guys are right now. I think he was talking about how they were like first in points per game.
Oh God.
Not just hitting points per game in 2024.
Yeah.
But he didn't expect that to last. It hasn't lasted, even though like they're keeping up their pace. They're still scoring like relatively well. Again, still a top 5 offense, but the defense needs to be better. And it would be great if we could bring in some help at the point of attack instead of another defensive liability.
I know.
But anyway, this was the MVP discussion. Was there anything else that you wanted to say on this? We'll probably be talking more about Jokic's MVP, his actual MVP case, and the kind of season that he's been having, because it is like really like ridiculous.
If he averages a 30-point triple-double and the Nuggets offense when he's playing is the highest in the league, I think he has a very good case, and you just got to get the seeding up there enough. The reality is that even if Grant and I don't care about the wins, the voters are going to care about it.
Yeah.
So the Nuggets are going to have to get some wins. And I just think Jokic is doing everything he possibly can to affect winning. Like, I think it's like maximized because he's having like arguably the best season of his career, at least offensively. I know we already criticized his defense a bit, but I don't care about defense when it comes to MVP.
Well, I know you don't care about defense, but defense contributes to winning, and winning is value. It also contributes to your net rating on the floor, by the way. So
true.
I think he's been actually like pretty like decent to good defensively over the last few games. So hopefully that continues, but it also helps when the guys around you are helping out on that end. Everybody has to be doing their job on that end of the floor. Yeah, I hope the Nuggets go on a winning streak, and then we can crown Jokic MVP for the fourth time. You know, regardless of how the season ends, like in the postseason.
I want the fourth MVP just for the historic like company that he would be in then.
I'm not one of those people, by the way, that doesn't like. We've talked about this so many times on the show, but for the people that are fighting us for the first time, first of all, if you made it to this point in the show, thank you so much. But second of all, I care a lot about the regular season. I think it matters where you finish in the seeding. I think it matters the things that the regular season reveals about your offense, about your defense, about your strengths, about your limitations, because I think that they ultimately come out in the playoffs one way or the other. I'm not one of those like, you know, Phoenix Suns that were just like, we just got to make the playoffs. We just got to make the 6 seed. Like, no, like I want to be at least a top 4 seed. I still think they can be a top 3 seed, honestly, this year.
That's what I would want.
But they need to start playing like it. I think they can. And I think they have started playing like it. Maybe not so much in the last Kings game because giving up the 23-point lead, not great. But it's also kind of on par with like the Nuggets of the past that have also been good teams, but, you know, tricked away large leads. But in the past, they would have lost to the Kings on the road. Like, I don't even remember the last time I saw the Nuggets win a Kings game on the road. So that was actually, I think, a solid win. And so was the Clippers. Like, just try to take care of the teams that are below you. Win a couple games against the teams that are above you in the standings. And for the love of God, stop losing to the Washington Wizards.
Yeah, don't do that again. Listeners, thank you so much for spending the time and hanging out with us. If you haven't subscribed and you're watching this and you liked what you saw, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing so you don't miss future shows, because we're going to be breaking down Nuggets games and with trade season coming up, giving our takes on all the interesting gossip. Follow us on Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music, where you can leave a review, and also on Instagram and TikTok and the Clip channel, where we're uploading snippets from the show. Remember, winning is fun and losing always sucks.
Sure does. But winning is awesome.